Picture an old man in a garden on the edge of ancient Athens. Around him have gathered students who, well, they've given up on the temples and the politics of the city to sit and think about how to live without fear. Epicurus is his name, and from that garden, somewhere right around the 3rd century BC, he poses a question that still runs in our headlines 23 centuries later. Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? If so, then he's not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? If so, then he's malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Well, where then does evil come from? That garden in Athens is long gone, but the question remains. It's not gone because it's never stopped working. This past year, the New York Times ran a piece titled, "Where is God in Gaza?" A few months earlier, the journalist Douthat had developed a whole column calling the argument from evil the best argument against having faith in God. Now, he didn't claim that naturalism is intellectually compelling. In fact, he said the opposite. What makes the case so strong is not that the universe looks like an accident. The problem is the excess of suffering in the world. Holocaust-scale horrors and the private agony of a single child both seem to exceed anything an all-good creator would permit, would allow. I want to state the skeptic's case at full strength because a weak version of it deserves no answer and it doesn't give any. The argument is powerful precisely because it works from inside our own commitments. It doesn't need to prove that there is no God in the abstract. It takes the God that we confess, that we believe in, a good, loving, all-powerful deity, and asks why that God tolerates the suffering we see. Listen, that's honest intellectual territory. We shouldn't pretend that it's just a skeptic's cheap shot. Here's the first thing the skeptic rarely notices, though. To call suffering evil, he has to borrow a moral standard his own worldview can't supply. If it's all just chemistry and physics, then suffering is just chemical reactions and biological machines, and who's to say that it shouldn't be? The outrage that he feels at the suffering of the innocent is real, but that outrage is an inner witness. It's the fingerprint of a creator who left his image in his creation. The moral law that he uses to indict God is itself evidence God exists. But I'm not going to lean on that parry in this argument too hard, because it's really just a first move. It doesn't console anyone. The man kneeling beside a hospital bed, he doesn't need to be told that his grief proves God's existence. He needs to know what God has done with that grief. So we have to go further than the opening exchange. We have to go a lot further. The existence of evil is something that we believers wrestle with as well. I'm not going to stand outside the question looking at it from a distance. I take it as seriously as any skeptic does, and I'll tell you why. Evil is real. The Bible has both the best explanation for it and the best solution to it. Owning the problem is not a concession that weakens the Christian case. It's the only honest place for us to begin. That honesty has to include a warning. Wes Huff put it well when he said that sometimes the right answer to the wrong question is the wrong answer. A tidy, tied up in a nice bow answer will not speak to the man whose wife has cancer. We're not here to win a debate at a deathbed. The apologist who reaches for a syllogism when a person is breaking apart has misread the room, or worse, he's misread the gospel. Here's something that the data tells us that I think should sober both sides. Pew Research has found that most American believers do not blame God for suffering at all. Roughly 80% attribute it to human actions, and only 14 to 15% say that suffering ever makes them doubt God's existence. Now think about what that means. The argument that looks decisive on paper moves almost no one in practice. The new atheist confidence and the apologist's anxiety are both aimed at a target that just isn't there. The problem of evil is a philosopher's wound and a sufferer's cry, but it's rarely a believer's deciding vote. People don't generally reason their way into faith, and they don't reason their way out of it under suffering. That fact should humble the apologist who thinks that a clever argument secures faith and the skeptic who thinks that suffering will dissolve it. I'm not going to defend God on the skeptic's terms. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to hand the skeptic the chair. Let him sit in the creator's seat for a moment and tell us how he would have done it better. Grant the skeptic everything. Assume that the all-good, all-powerful, all-loving God exists, the very God the argument says can't. let's say he's real, he's on the throne, and he's handed you the design. Now, Mr. or Miss Skeptic, you tell me, what should he have done? Well, let's start with the obvious. He should stop murder. No reasonable person would disagree with that. So build it from there. A world in which the murderer can't murder. But think about what that requires. To stop the murder, you have to stop the blow. To stop the blow, you must stop the hand. To stop the hand, you must stop the will. Because the hand only swings where the will sends it. So God reaches down into the man's choice, into the deciding place inside of him, and overrides it. The knife doesn't fall. Good, you've stopped one murder. But you can't stop there, and you know it. If God overrides the murderer's evil choice, then consistency demands he override every evil choice. Why would he stop the killing and leave the cruelty? Why halt a hand that strikes and permit the tongue that wounds? So now he must override the cruel word before it's spoken. He must override the cold heart before it hardens. He must reach into the husband about to betray his wife and switch the decision before it's made. Every correction, every single one, requires reaching into a will and changing it from the inside. Now run that out to its end. A being whose every choice is overridden the moment that it tends towards wrong is no longer choosing anything. He can't do otherwise because the doing otherwise has been engineered out of him. You've not built a better person, you've built a puppet on a very short string. The man who never harms his neighbor because he's incapable of forming the intention isn't virtuous. He's a mechanism that runs the way that it was wired to. You set out to delete evil and you've deleted freedom along with it. Now look at what that costs. A world without genuine freedom is a world without genuine love. Because love that cannot be refused, that isn't love at all. It's a machine, a mechanism that's just wearing love's face. The kiss that the will cannot withhold is not affection, it's a reflex. The loyalty that cannot be betrayed, that's not loyalty. It's a circuit closing because it was built to close. You've engineered a creation of well-behaved machines, and there's no one home in any of them to love or be loved. That's the skeptic's Theodicy. He came to indict the Creator for the world's horrors, and when you hand him the pen and ask him to write a better one, he produces a horror of just a different kind. A clean, safe, silent world full of obedient automata and empty of every soul. He's justified a God, but it's a God who made nothing worth making. You have a world without beings that in any sense that makes them what we would call human. You have a world where a challenge to God's existence because of the existence of evil would never occur because there's no one to think it. Consider this. The skeptic didn't stumble into that result by accident. He arrived there because the choice that he faced is the same choice the real God faced at the dawn of creation. Free creatures who could love or safe creatures who could not. There's no third door here. There's no world where you keep the love and lose the risk. God chose the creatures who could love, and the very capacity that made love possible made evil possible too. The skeptic, given the throne, just discovered why. Why would God take the risk like that? Because of what the first humans were made to be. They were created in His image with rational thought and emotion and a will. They could make real choices, and the ability to choose was not a flaw in the design or an oversight that God failed to patch. It was essential because their highest purpose, the very thing that they were created for, was a real relationship with Him marked by the most intimate kind of love. And for love to be real, it has to be free. It cannot be coerced. It can't be pre-programmed. So the risk was built in from the start. The capacity to choose love was the same capacity to choose against it. You do not get one without the other. God did not create evil. He created the possibility of evil as the price of the possibility of love. The great risk in choice is the potential to make a decision to not do what is best and right, but to commit an act of evil instead. He took that risk with open eyes because a creation that could not refuse Him could not love Him either. I'll be honest about an in-house debate at this point because dodging it would be dishonest. Not every Christian frames this argument, this debate, the way that I just did. Some of my Reformed brethren argue that God wills evil to exist for a purpose, for the praise of His glory. Others and I'm among them, insist that evil is the creature's contribution and it's not God's. Now, these two positions can't both be right. If God ordains whatsoever comes to pass for his own ends, then the free will account just collapses. If evil is genuinely ours and not his, then it was not authored from the throne. Now, I would love to launch into dissecting all of this, but this isn't either the time or the place for all of that. I'd love to, but just don't have the time. I stand with the creature's contribution. I will not say, even to win an argument against a skeptic, that God authors evil for his glory. He does not. The Bible grounds this in a garden and a single command. After placing man in Eden, God speaks. We read about it in Genesis chapter 2. There we find this. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may eat freely, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Now take careful note of what the command assumes. A prohibition only makes sense if the one that it's given to can actually obey or disobey. You don't forbid a stone to eat. You don't warn a machine away from a tree. The command presupposes a real choice, a will that can move one way or the other. God did not place a fence around the tree and then electrify it. He spoke a word and left the man free to honor it or break it. The freedom that would later make the fall possible is right there in the grammar of the first commandment. I concede that that is the world as it is now, this is not the best of all possible worlds. The fall broke it. The man ate. The world cracked. The creation as we find it is shot through with horror. We all know that. The skeptic is right about that part. He's right about Gaza and the cancer ward and the famine and the child who suffers and never understands why. I'm not going to pretend that brokenness is a misunderstanding or a trick of perspective. It's real and it's terrible and we all hate it. But the question was never whether this world is perfect. The question is what this world is for. And once you ask it that way, the whole thing just turns over. The world with free creatures who fell and a God who would stoop to redeem them is not the best of all possible worlds, but it's the best way to the best of all possible worlds. The road runs through freedom and fall and redemption because there's no shorter road that arrives anywhere worth arriving. A child who's never allowed to risk falling never learns to walk. The parent who holds the toddler upright every second, who will not let the small body wobble and drop, is not protecting the child. He's preventing the walking. The very capacity that lets us fall is the capacity that lets us be raised up and made to stand. Take away the possibility of the fall, you take away the possibility of the standing with it. The skeptic asked for a reason. He wanted a justification, an argument that balances the books and explains why the suffering was worth it. And Christianity, at its deepest, doesn't hand him that. It doesn't give him a syllogism that settles the account. It hands him a person. Here's the move that no other answer makes. A God who suffers does not explain evil from above. He enters it from below. The entire Christian story is the answer to the problem of evil, and only Christianity answers it like this. That's not a theodicy in the philosopher's sense. It doesn't justify God's ways and tie them up in a neat bow. It changes the subject when changing the subject is precisely the point. Look at what God actually did. The God the skeptic accuses of indifference, the God charged with sitting safe and sovereign in heaven while the world bleeds, he didn't stay there. He took on flesh. He walked into the very evil in question. In a garden called Gethsemane, he sweat and trembled and asked for the cup to pass, and then he drank it. He let the injustice and the cruelty and the cold human heart do their worst to him. They nailed him to a Roman cross, and they watched him die. Isaiah saw it all coming 7 centuries before. In the 53rd chapter of his book, we find this. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, we did not esteem him. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was buried for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. I want to draw out some key phrases and some thoughts that are conveyed there around which to wrap a workable theodicy. We read of a man of sorrows who was acquainted with grief. It means not a God who keeps his distance from grief, but one who knows it the way you know an old friend. We find the phrase, he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. In other words, he did not explain the wound. He took it into his own body. That is what we have to bring to the man at that bedside. Not a man at a lectern. To the one whose wife is dying. Christianity doesn't offer a clever argument that survives cross-examination. It offers a God who's been there, in the dark, bleeding. The God who knows what it is to watch death come and to feel forsaken. That's not a syllogism, it's a presence. And at 3 a.m, a presence is the only thing that's going to work, that's going to hold. The skeptic wanted God to fix the world from a safe distance. Instead, God climbed down into it and died. This is not the answer that the skeptic looked for, but it is the answer that he needs. And finally, because choice is real, the skeptic has to choose what he will do now that his challenge has been answered.